everybody. It's good to see you all. Thank you all for coming out on this very chilly Monday night. I'm glad you're here. So I am Amy Gravino, and this is the girl behind the curtain, a journey inside the nooks and crannies of autism, and that curtain thing is kind of literal in some ways, and you'll find out about that a little later on in the presentation. So to bring you into my world a little bit, I was asked a few years ago to write a letter to my younger self by a woman who was a reader of my blog. She had a 9-year-old daughter on the spectrum who was just diagnosed, and she said they didn't know any other older girls or women on the spectrum, and maybe I could do this as a way of giving advice to her daughter and her and other families with kids on the spectrum. So that was what I did. Dear Amy, I know you're feeling pretty bad right now. The other kids make fun of you a lot, and you don't know why. You're trying really hard to be friends with them, doing all of the things you think they want you to do, and it's just not working. But there is one thing you should know. It's not your fault. Other people might say that, and you won't be able to listen to them, but I'm hoping that you will if it's coming from me. It's not your fault. Say it over and over in your head when you feel the worst, because that's when you'll need it most. It's not your fault. How can it not be your fault, you'll say to yourself as the next few years go by. Everyone else can do this, can make friends and be normal. Why can't you? That's just one of the many questions I know you have, questions you don't know how or are afraid to ask. They make you feel overwhelmed, like sitting in Mrs. St. Pierre's classroom every day, fidgeting nervously in your seat. You always get up during class to sharpen your pencil, and I know it's because you enjoy the smell when they're freshly sharpened. It calms you down. So don't feel bad if the other kids snicker or laugh when you smell your pencil. They just don't understand. You care a lot about what the other kids think of you. I know you hate going to pool every week because you have to change in the locker room, and the girls make fun of your feet. This will cause you not to feel comfortable wearing flip-flops for many years, and you won't be okay with wearing them again until you're much older. It'll be like that with a lot of things people say to you in school. Their exact words will fade from memory, but the effects they have on you will last a long time. But don't worry. One day you're going to make friends with someone who really loves your feet and will call your little toe, the one that didn't grow in right, your lucky toe. That's something you feel like you could use a lot of right now. Luck. You keep hoping things will get better, but they never do. I have some good news, though. You won't lose that hope. No matter what happens, you'll still be optimistic. Foolishly, maybe, but when you're older, people will tell you how wonderful it is that you are that way. But I have to be honest with you. Things are going to get a lot worse before they get better. You'll be in junior high school soon, and you don't know it, but 7th and 8th grades will be 2 of the worst years of your life. Once again, it's not your fault. You like to look at things outside the window. The trees and blue sky make you feel calm. One day you'll be in study hall, and you'll go right up to the window and stick your head out of it. That's when someone will tell you to jump. Other voices will join in, and even after the teacher finally tells everyone to be quiet and calms things down, you'll hear them in your head for a long time to come. Every day, someone will make you feel less, not human, unwanted, and you'll keep your head down and take it, because no one's going to tell you anything different. But I will. You're not less, Amy. You're more. More because you have to work twice as hard as everyone else to make your voice heard. You don't know how to fight right now, except for when you lash out after not being able to handle the pain anymore, and then it's you who gets into trouble rather than your tormentors. They know how not to be seen, to avoid detection. You don't. Even as an adult, you won't quite fully master the art of subtlety, but right now you're bare to the world, completely vulnerable. And your classmates are taking full advantage of that fact. They know how to hurt you in the worst ways, so they can get their kicks from your reactions. You can't understand what they're doing, and you just play straight into their hands every time. Once again, it's not your fault. These days, your classmates call you names: ugly, freak, psycho, loser, retard. They call you these things because they don't know you, don't care to, and don't want to. You're trying so hard to force yourself into their world with little to no success. But you will have friends one day, Amy. Better still, you won't have to fight for their friendship. They will come to you. I know how unbelievable that seems, especially since you feel like no one wants to be around you at all, not even your parents. But you are loved, even if you don't realize it. You just have to learn to love yourself. There are some things you're good at, Amy, like writing. You just started writing some poems, and were happy when you saw them published in the local paper. Your mom and dad send them in for you, just in case you were wondering how that happened. I have 3 words of advice for you. Keep doing it. One day, you won't just be writing for yourself, you'll be writing to help other people. And your writing will help people, even when you don't realize it. So you've got to keep at it. It's hard to think that you're good at anything when people are constantly telling you that everything you do and are is wrong. In middle and high school, your fellow classmates will tell you to your face to kill yourself, and that no one wants you around or would care if you were gone. Don't listen to them. I know it's difficult. and their words will go right into you, but they aren't worth it. You are a good person, a person worth having around, and you make so many people sad if you are gone. The world is going to need you when you grow up, Amy, so you have to get there. You have to make it through these dark days because you're going to make a difference in the future. Someday, people will want to hear what you have to say, and you won't believe it at first, but it will be meaningful and wonderful. You're going to have to take a lot of crap and go through a lot of pain to get there, but I promise you it will be worth it. My time with you is now growing short. I hope that some of the things I've said have brought you comfort, or at least given you assurance that there is indeed light at the end of this tunnel. In short, things will get better. A lot of people will say that to you, and you'll think that they're crazy or just trying to make you feel better, but it's really honestly true. You're an incredibly special, talented girl, and right now you're toiling in obscurity, as so many great artists do, but someday the world is going to see how amazing you are, and all you'll think is, where were you people when I was younger? The future seems far away, almost impossible to think about, but don't be afraid to think about it. You're not even sure if you're going to have a future, but you will. You will. And I'll say to you now 3 words that you don't hear very often, even when your mother says them to you. 3 words that you'll be desperate to hear when you get older, especially from a good-looking member of the opposite sex, but that seem very off in the distance right now. I love you. I love you, my younger, high-strung, spastic, uniquely wonderful self, and I'll be here waiting for you. See you in 15 years. Love and many hugs, your 26-year-old self. So, we're here to talk about girls and women on the spectrum. Why do they matter? A lot of people still think that autism is autism, and the way it affects boys is the way it affects girls. Wrong. Not true. They matter because they're diagnosed less frequently than boys. You know, we've all heard the 4-to-1 diagnosis ratio, and that causes a problem. When girls are not visible in the autism world, they're not getting the proper supports that they need. So, but just because they are diagnosed less frequently, it doesn't mean they have autism any less frequently than boys. All it means is that we're not as adept at recognizing autism in girls and women as we are in boys. And that's a problem. That's a real big problem. So, and there's just so little research literature devoted to girls and women. It's beginning to change. There are starting to be genetic studies and things that are starting to look more closely at girls and women, but an overwhelming amount of the research literature looks at boys on the spectrum. There are studies, their participants are just boys, which is crazy to me that you wouldn't have a girl, at least one lousy girl in your study, to balance out the testosterone a little bit there, because there's some major differences that you're going to see. So girls and women on the spectrum matter and have always mattered, and they matter because we need to talk about them and we need to do better for them. And I count myself among that. But there are some things that need to be cleared up as to what girls on the spectrum are and are not. They are misdiagnosed. Very frequently, girls on the spectrum are diagnosed with bipolar disorder, ADHD, a whole myriad of other conditions up before they finally arrive at the autism diagnosis. They're underdiagnosed. Many women, I know so many women who were not diagnosed until they were in their 30s, 40s, 50s, even beyond. They don't get diagnosed at the younger age that a lot of boys do for a whole number of reasons. But they're so intelligent. They're, some of the smartest people, and I'm not just tooting my own horn, even though I am kind of smart, but there are some pretty bright gals out there. And that's part of why they're able to compensate for some of their behaviors and kind of learn social behaviors on an intellectual level, but not on an intuitive level. So girls and women, have these abilities and have imaginations and are creative, and that tends to distinguish them from boys on the spectrum because what you hear is not what girls exhibit. And so it causes problems with them getting proper diagnoses for that reason. And we're gosh darn honest. I have been told that I'm brutally honest at times. I try not to be brutal. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but that can be a problem too. That can create vulnerability and a higher tendency to be victimized because girls and women are very honest and don't have that kind of sense of guile that others might have. It does lead to an increased rate in being in victimization, be it financial victimization, emotional, physical, sexual. Unfortunately, those rates are pretty high, and that's a problem and something that we do need to address. But what are they not? They're not the same as boys. We are not the same as boys in any way. You might have heard of that theory about autism being the extreme male brain from Simon Baron Cohen. Hogwash. Not true. Because my brain is my brain. It's my lady brain. That's what I call it, my lady brain. My autism lady brain. And it looks different than a guy on the spectrum's brain. And it needs to be acknowledged that there are differences, because otherwise we're just going to be trying to throw the same blanket treatments and things out for girls and women, and it's not going to work. It's not going to be what people need. The expression, if you've seen one person with autism, you've seen one person with autism. And it holds true when it comes to boys and girls. So that is why we have to distinguish between boys and girls on the spectrum and have to make an extra effort to provide the supports and services that girls and women need that they are not currently getting. And a lot of times, girls and women tend to turn inward, which is why you often don't see those autism diagnoses at a younger age. Boys will have tantrums. They'll be more external in exhibiting their autism. Girls tend to go, I know I did this. I went in on myself. I was not lashing out at other people. I was lashing out inside. But if you could see in here, it was like a war zone. But this tends to happen a lot with girls and women, internalizing emotions, internalizing everything that's going on, rather than having more outward tantrums. Although girls and women certainly do have meltdowns, and I've had meltdowns. But because of the intelligence I mentioned before, and the ability to kind of understand social behaviors on an intellectual level, a lot of girls and women develop compensatory behaviors. So they learn how to mask, they learn how to either hide the symptoms or mute them down significantly when they're out in the world. As women, we are socialized more. We're expected to be social, to bond emotionally with other people. And so from an early age, that's the case. And so girls and women have to learn to compensate very quickly to try to meet those demands. And it's exhausting. I mean, imagine going out every day and wearing like a mask, and you're having to wear this and be somebody else all day long. And it's only when you get home that you can take off that mask and be who you really are. No one should have to live like that. And unfortunately, way too many women on the spectrum do. Women are expected to bond emotionally, right? But that's extremely challenging for a lot of women on the spectrum. It doesn't necessarily come innately the way it does for neurotypical women. The things that women talk about and bond through are not necessarily things that women on the spectrum might be interested in. I know for me, I can't even be around women who are talking about babies and stuff because I didn't like children when I was a child, let alone now. I don't understand the fascination with babies. I don't. They spit, they poop, they smell. I don't get it. But I'm not going to put anybody down, but it's not something that I can connect to other women about. But even when I was younger, even in high school, there are discussions and things that are centered in women's interactions. And if you're not into those things, or if you don't understand the reason to be into those things, it's extremely hard to forge that connection. And something I know that I've dealt with in my life is if I don't see the point of something, I can't get worked up about it. I can't have a conversation about it. I can't engage about it. So that makes it very challenging. And you want to talk about the expectations of society. Everything that neurotypical women feel, all the pressures about you have to look a certain way, you have to weigh this much, you have to wear this dress, you have to have your hair this way. Women on the spectrum feel that too. And in some ways it's even harder because I know for me, with my sensory issues when I was younger, I would look through my teen magazines and, if I just wore this makeup, everybody would like me. If I could wear this dress, I'll have a boyfriend. But I'm skinny as a twig, and I don't have boobs to put in this dress, and I don't have motor coordination to put on mascara. I'm going to stab myself in the eye, and I don't want to wear mascara anyway. It smells. Why do people wear this? So all this stuff is, and maybe this is just me, but I know that I felt these expectations and this pressure, and I put a lot of it on myself. And so women on the spectrum do experience that to the same degree, if not more, than neurotypical women. So to tell you a little bit about me, this is the very beginning. Here I am, 3 years old, sitting on a pumpkin. I'm happy. Things weren't so bad back then. This is before I was diagnosed. Everything was going along pretty well. I know if you ask my parents now, they could look back and see things that were happening when I was this age, 4 years old, that they didn't know at the time because they didn't know about autism. But this was kind of the good period, before things really went to hell in a handbasket, as it were. And so I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome when I was 10 years old. Now, this was in 1994, which was the same year that it was added to the DSM-4. So it was kind of a minor miracle that I was even diagnosed. My parents went from referral to referral until we finally got to Stony Brook University Children's Psychiatry Psychology Department, and a psychologist there diagnosed me. And as I said, being a girl, it's really incredible that I was diagnosed at that time, at that age. But things didn't change too much after I first got the diagnosis. And by the way, don't be fooled, that is not an 80-year-old librarian, that's me on the first day of 4th grade. I know it's hard to tell, but so when you're 10 years old, the word autism doesn't really mean anything. At least at that point it didn't, because nobody knew what autism was back then. I had no kind of overarching reference to draw from. Autism was not a word in the national conversation. There was no Autism Speaks. There was not anything, because still at that point, people with autism were in institutions for the most part. You didn't see them out in the community. You just didn't. So I thought that I was alone. I thought that I was the only person dealing with what I was dealing with. I can't even begin to express how alone I felt. It's the most awful feeling. But in elementary school, when you are a kid, what all kids know is different. This kid's different. It doesn't matter why, but if you're different, you're going to get picked on. And I was bullied, pretty much every day. And it was very hard. I wanted more than anything to make friends, and I wasn't able to do it. And I would keep kind of throwing myself on the proverbial fire. This girl would be nice to me one day and then treat me like dirt the next day, and I just kept going back and trying to be friends with her. I don't know why. She was horrible, but for some reason I wanted to be friends with her. And it just was this exercise in almost, sadism in a way. But it was hard. You're different. And the relationship to the diagnosis, this is where it started. I didn't really, as I said, have much of an understanding of what autism was. I just knew that I was different. And there was a shift that occurred, because prior to the diagnosis, it was, well, what's wrong with everybody else? Why don't they see things the way that I do? And then after the diagnosis, it was, well, what's wrong with me? Why don't I see things the way everybody else does? So, and I think part of that also was due to, incipient puberty and middle school coming, which is just the worst time in anybody's life. If you had a good experience in middle school, I think you're a liar, or I don't even want to know you, because that's just not possible. In middle school, as I said, I went to a very small school. I had 88 kids in my graduating class. I knew most of them from kindergarten. So once you're labeled as something, the freak, the weirdo, whatever, that's what you are until the end. And I kind of got to this, I was kind of denying the diagnosis in a way. I was like, no, I don't have this, I don't want this, I hate this isn't me, I don't have autism, because I was starting to be more aware of it, but all I could see was that it was a negative thing. There was not a single thing at this point in my life that made me think that autism could be a good thing in any way. That wasn't the message that I was getting from anywhere. And that's very hard. Like, imagine everywhere you turn, there's nothing supporting who you are. There's nothing that says that it's okay that you're different. It was just incredibly lonely. And the bullying, as I said, it magnified, it increased in middle school, and and the difference between bullying in elementary and middle school is that it gets more subtle in middle school. The kids become more, they learn how to do it more under the radar when the teachers aren't looking. So as I said in my letter, all they saw was me reacting, and I would get in trouble rather than the people who were bullying me, which is not fair, but that's the way it goes. So it became, a whole different, and especially the way that girls bully is different than the way that boys bully, I think. It's much more psychological. It's much more, it's like a Cold War thing. I was basically in a Cold War with this one girl for all of middle and high school. Like, I was America, she was Russia, I mean, bring out the Cossacks. It was rough. And it's a really terrible thing, these mind games that you're expected to understand and play. And when you're on the spectrum, not only do you not understand these mind games, you have no interest in understanding them. I didn't like that. I just wanted to say what was on my mind, say like it was. And people weren't doing that, and I didn't understand that. And every time I tried, I got yelled at, I got in trouble, and told that it was wrong. So then high school came around, and what tiny shred of self-esteem I might have had left was just completely gone by then. And I began, as I had said before, I was distancing myself from the diagnosis. I just wanted nothing to do with it. I wanted to move beyond it. I wanted to, it's like I would think to myself, I'm smart. I can be better than this. I can overcome this. And yet every time I would make some progress, something would always happen to remind me that I had autism. So that's not going anywhere. And it would just devastate me all over again. So it was like a tug of war, at this point. And thinking about the future, thinking about what am I going to do, I knew I was going to go to college because I'm the daughter of 2 teachers, and I couldn't miss school if I was bleeding out of my eyes. So college was absolutely an option. There was no choice. But beyond that, I just had no idea. I couldn't see anything. People talk about in your senior year of high school, the future, what am I going to do? I couldn't see that far. I didn't even know if I was going to live that long, honestly, because I was suicidal all through school. Although on a practical level, I actually couldn't commit suicide because I couldn't swallow pills. I was afraid of knives and sharp things. I didn't know how to tie a knot in a rope. So on a practical level, I wasn't going anywhere because that just wasn't going to happen. But something kept me around. I don't know what, but it kept me around long enough to be here to talk to you all today. So I'm grateful for that. So then college. Everything changed in college. It was like the world opened up to me. It was such a radical difference from high school. That girl there, she was on my floor in my dorm my freshman year, and when we met, it turned out that she has a brother who has Asperger's. So she immediately understood me in a way that nobody else did, and it was a godsend to have met her. I'll always remember she came over to ask me for a can of tuna, and I gave one to her, and she proceeded to stab it with a knife, and I was like, I have a can opener, what's wrong with you? But that just stands, and I just actually a few months ago went to her wedding, so we're still friends after all this time, which I never thought I would have a friendship that would last that long, but it has. I graduated college in 2005, so it's been a little over 10 years since then. But in college, I did a program the summer before, and it was for 2 weeks. I was homesick for exactly one night, and then I never looked back. I never looked back. It was in Pennsylvania is where I went to college. So I grew up on Long Island, so it was about 4 hours away, which was far enough away to make me feel like I could be independent, but close enough that my parents could come if there was some crazy emergency. But it was great for me to spread my wings. I started making friends, and I had my first boyfriend, which I had never had before. And then I had my group of friends not liking my boyfriend, which I'd never had before. So that was a totally different kind of thing to deal with. But the biggest thing was, as I said, finding people who understood autism, which I had not had ever before. And that was a huge, huge thing. And I did graduate, with my bachelor's degree in English. And then I went to graduate school. And now I have a master's degree in ABA. I started grad school in 2007 in New Jersey. And this was the first time that there was a shift that began, that I started to see my autism as an asset. And where that began was I was in a documentary called Normal People Scare Me. And that was in 2005. It was the first time someone had ever wanted to put me in a documentary, feature me in some way, hear my voice, and broadcast it out to other people. It was overwhelming. It was not something I'd ever experienced before. And so that was filmed in the winter of my senior year of college. And then now we just filmed, that's Joey Travolta, he's the brother of John Travolta. We just filmed the sequel, Normal People Scare Me 2, TOO, which is like a 10 years later thing, which is going to be coming out soon. And so it was graduate school and just before with the documentary that I started seeing my autism differently. It was finally changing. The tide was turning. I had no idea this could be a good thing. People actually want to hear from somebody who has autism. I didn't know that. They want to hear from me? Okay. And I started gaining confidence in myself. I started building up Amy Gravino from the ground. I made myself better, stronger, faster. I was the $3 million woman. I'm not that rich. So that's when it began. And it was a real turning point. And it made me see myself differently, which had never happened before. And the other thing that created another shift was when I spoke at the United Nations in 2011. This was, I don't even know what I can say about it. I mean, you have the director of the Mental Health Division of the World Health Organization, you have the Chief Science Officer of Autism Speaks, you have the chair of an autism committee in Bangladesh, who is also the daughter of the Prime Minister, and then me. Like, what am I doing with these people? I'm like Ringo and the others are the other Beatles, you know? It's like, why am I here? No, I love Ringo. Don't tell him I said that. But this was a huge, huge moment. I remember after I finished speaking on the panel, I almost felt like I was drunk because I was so exhilarated and happy. And it was Amy Gravino on the world stage. How is this possible? How is this little girl who was sitting on a pumpkin all those years ago now sitting on a panel at the United Nations? Nobody ever made me feel like that could be possible for me. I had to think that that was possible for me. I had to find that voice inside of me that said that I can do this. I deserve this. I am worthy of being here. And that's the thing. That's the thing I had to learn, is that nobody could give that to me. You know, my mother supported me. She was wonderful. She was always there for me. My dad took a little longer to come around. But no affirmation is greater than the one, and validation is greater than the one that comes from within. And it took me a long, long time to figure that out. And so that was, you know, that was a major turning point. And there is video of this, by the way, on my website if you want to watch it. So this was a huge, this was just definitely, you know, really another seminal moment in my history. And I've been doing so much public speaking since then, and this kind of just launched me off of a platform, and I'm always grateful for that. So a lot of people ask, you know, about love. Like, is my child ever going to find someone who will love them? Are they going to love somebody? That's a big piece. That's a part of the human experience. Maybe it's not so easy to think about or verbalize, but it certainly is a part of what it means to be human. And I went through my trials and tribulations like many people do. As Allison mentioned, I'm writing a book called The Naughty Audie about my experiences with dating and relationships. And as I had said before, I had a boyfriend in college, my first one, when I was 19. It ended horribly, because how could it not end horribly? I'm pretty sure he was on the spectrum, but every time I brought it up, he would change the subject. And he dumped me, you know, because he wanted a, quote, real woman, which I guess meant one with large breasts and blonde hair, according to him. And it ended up that we lived in the same dorm building, and I was out on the stoop one night with him and a mutual friend of ours, and he assaulted me in front of the mutual friend, and that sounds worse than it was. He was 6'3", I'm 5'0". He kicked me in the shins, and he slapped my forehead with the back of his hand, because we're in 5th grade, right? Because that's what you do. I ended up getting a PFA, which is a protection from abuse order, which is like one rung below a restraining order against him. You know, he had to move out of the dorm. It was this whole thing. And then when I graduated college, I ended up moving across the country. There was this period between college and grad school where I lived 3,000 miles away in Seattle, Washington. Crazy, right? And I fell in love, and I got my heart broken. Your typical country song, like I say here. I had met this guy online on a message board for Kevin Smith fans, Kevin Smith, the movie director, and I went to Seattle my spring break of senior year of college, fell for him even more when I met him in person, because I went with some friends for other reasons. And so I wound up moving out there. I lost my virginity to him. He was 2 years younger than I. And what I didn't know was that he had a girlfriend the whole time, and he'd been lying to me. He was sleeping with half the women in Seattle. And when this all came out, and by the way, it all came out either online or on the phone. I never saw him in person. He never had the balls to confront me face to face when this all came out. His girlfriend threatened to kill me. She was calling me all hours of the day and night, threatening to kill me if I didn't leave town, harassing me. And every time the phone rang, I would answer it because I kept hoping that it was him saying he was choosing me over her, because that was where my heart was at that moment, because when you're in love, you're stupid. And I certainly was. I had to pick up the pieces. I had no choice. And I found a strength in myself that I didn't know existed. As terrible and horrific as the pain was, it actually showed me something that I didn't know was there. Because a few months later, he sent me a message online. He said, "Sorry for ruining your life." And I sat there thinking, how dare you give yourself that much credit? You didn't ruin, I'm still here. You didn't ruin my life. Like, what the hell? You know, I was so angry. And that was the first moment that I'd ever gotten angry over the whole thing. Because the whole time up till then, I was sad, I was hurt, I was heartbroken. I'd never been angry. And this was a healthy anger. It's good to feel anger sometimes, especially in situations like these. Too often as women and women on the spectrum, we're told, you're not allowed to get angry. It's ugly when women get angry. But it's important and it's healthy. And when I felt it in this moment, it was humanizing, and it made me feel validated. And so it was such another turning moment for me, and it made me stronger than I ever knew that I was. So again, love can have its pitfalls and perils, and there can be good things. And I still remain optimistic because even after this guy, I met another guy, and I never thought I would open up to anybody again. I was afraid to, but I found myself having feelings for this new person after 7 years, because that's how long it took me to heal after everything. And it ended up not working out with that guy, but I was still okay afterward. And that was the moment I knew I'd really moved on. That was the moment I knew that I was going to be okay. And I'd never had that feeling up until then. So when we talk about success, I think that success can't be defined, just one thing that applies to everybody, because success looks different for everyone. Now, I have done these things. I have become a certified college coach and a certified autism specialist. I am an autism consultant and a speaker. I call myself the Dr. Ruth of the autism world because I'm short and I talk about sex a lot. But for me, I don't consider myself successful by my own definition because I'm still financially dependent on my parents. That's me. That's my definition. It's hard for me to say that I am successful when I feel like I'm not at that point yet that I want to be at. But I've done all these things that I certainly never thought I would do in a million years. I started my own business, Ascot Coaching. I have an office in Fairfield, New Jersey, which I share with a colleague and friend who is also my business manager sometimes. And I've done these things that I never could have seen for myself, but that I'm so glad I've had the chance to do. And I think that anything really is possible for folks on the spectrum as long as we have the right supports in place, as long as we have people who believe in us in place. And so the question then becomes, what can you do to better understand your child on the spectrum? And one thing I always say is you have to take things one day at a time. I think too often people say, well, this horrible thing happened, today. What happened today doesn't mean it's going to happen tomorrow. What happened today is not necessarily a predictor of what will happen tomorrow. And it's, we all want to look at the big picture and think, well, what's going to be happening 5 years from now, 10 years from now? But sometimes you have to step back and just take things a day at a time, And things aren't always going to happen all at once. You know what I mean? Things aren't always going to come together in one fell swoop. But if you take it slow, it gives you a better perspective, I think. And be an advocate, and also give your child the tools to become a self-advocate themselves. Give them the ability to have their voice. But while that's still growing, while they're still maybe not able to speak up for themselves just yet, you can be that voice. You can be the one who speaks up for them to the school, to the IEP meetings, to whatever it may be. And be in their corner no matter what. And I know you are. You don't need me to tell you that. I know you're all in your kids' corners. You don't need me to tell you that. But it's just so important to advocate for them when they're not able to do so for themselves. And empower them to become advocates as well. Empower them to speak up and raise their voices when they're ready and able to do that. You can't stop life from happening. I always say this. People want to put their kids in a protective bubble and hope that nothing ever happens to them. But if you put your kids in a bubble and hope that nothing ever happens to them, nothing will ever happen to them, good or bad. I am not saying that I have loved all the bad things that have ever happened to me. But today, even my worst days today, I'm grateful for because they're better than the best days that I had when I was younger. Let that sink in for a minute. My worst days now are better than the best days I had when I was younger. And I can see that now, and I have that perspective and that knowledge because I know how bad things can be. And it didn't destroy me. It didn't take me down, Kids, people on the spectrum are stronger than I think a lot of people realize. We have a strength inside of us that we're kind of forced to have in some ways because we have to speak for ourselves. We have to work harder to be acknowledged and recognized. So I think that if you give children and people on the spectrum knowledge, the tools that they need to be successful in life, when you're an adult, when you're 25 years old, does it really matter if you know how many red balls there are between the red balls and blue balls? No, it matters if you can cross the street. But you can't cross the street, you have to be able to cross the street. The life skills are the stuff that are the most important. I think we get hung up on the other stuff a lot of times in school. I'm not trying to diminish academics, because I love academics. I love learning stuff. But I think it's those life skills that are so vastly important. And if you give people on the spectrum all the knowledge that they need, that's what's going to take them to the rest of their lives. And not just like life skills knowledge and money management and things like, and how to do laundry and cook. I'm also talking about sexuality. People think that if they tell their kids about sex and about the birds and the bees, it'll make them want to go have sex. No. If you don't tell them, then they're going to get their information from their peers or from someone off the street, or God knows, or from the internet or from porn, and they're going to have a completely warped and twisted idea of what human relationships and sexuality are. The best thing you can do is answer questions that you're asked, and if you don't know the answer, say, I'm not sure. Why don't we find that out together? Because that's what it's about. It's about learning things. You learn from your child, and your child learns from you. To me, that's the best kind of symbiotic relationship. And change your own perceptions of autism. It's so easy to think of autism as the constant bad guy, and it's not always. People on the spectrum, we have tremendous gifts. We have a way of seeing the world that is different from everyone else, and it's valuable. And it's important to kind of see that, when you feel that it's getting you down and it's becoming too much, remember that it's not all bad. And the things that I always say are never helpful, yelling, okay? I know, it's like the natural parental instinct. My dad would default to yelling as soon as something, but you know what? When I would get yelled at, all I heard was the noise of being yelled at. I didn't hear a word that my dad was saying, because I would shut down because of that noise. I needed to clamp my ears. I needed to get away from that noise of the yelling, the anger in his voice. I needed to get away from that anger. That's all I heard was the anger. I didn't hear what he was trying to tell me. So I would really suggest to try to avoid yelling as much as you can. I know it's hard. For some reason, parents seem to think that things are heard better at a louder volume, but they're not necessarily. It just doesn't work that way. And I know it never helped me, certainly. Having low expectations, not helpful. I know, people think, well, this person has autism, maybe they can just do one or two. No, set higher expectations. I know, for me, that no one's expectations for myself were higher than my own. I used to set some ridiculous standards for myself. And if I didn't meet them, I would feel terrible about myself. But when everyone around you, it just doesn't think that you're capable of anything, it's frustrating. And so you start to look elsewhere. But I would say don't ever have too low of expectations. Believe that it's possible for your child to do great things, and then they'll start to believe it about themselves too. And don't say it's all autism's fault. If you have a 14-year-old kid and they're not listening, or something's going wrong and they're having a meltdown, it may not be because they're autistic. It may be because they're 14 years old and they're full of hormones that are screwing them up wildly beyond comprehension. So teenagers are still teenagers, whether they have autism or not. So sometimes things that are going wrong or issues that are arising are because a person, is a person. Before they're on the spectrum, they're a human being. And everybody, deals with things differently and just maybe reacting to something in a way that has nothing to do with the autism. So don't always, demonize autism, because I think that will encourage the person to demonize autism in themselves. And I don't think that that's a healthy thing to do in any way. So this is my contact information, so you can feel free to email me and go to my social media pages. And thank you all.